Welcome everyone to the Simply SaaS Meetup. We like to hold these once a month, as JC said, and always highlight entrepreneurs who are really past a certain stage that it's so difficult to get past, which is, the 2 years of developing product and getting to market and continuing on and getting more customers. And today we have Mr. Beard.
Hi.
Beard. Welcome. Man, there are so many questions and so many themes that I want to get into today. And before we do that, I really just want to learn a little bit more about the genesis of why Atlanta. You were in San Francisco for 5 years, 6 years?
4 years.
4 years.
So I'm British originally, but I moved to San Francisco for the bright lights and shiny things of startup world. I've been contracting and various things back in England, and I had the whole if I'm gonna make a career in technology, I should probably move to San Francisco for a shot. Had the opportunity to move. So yeah, I was there for 4 years full time with Abby, who's my wife over there, and we moved to Atlanta so she could go to school actually. But working in the type of technology I work in means I don't really need to be anywhere specifically. San Francisco is a great place to make opportunities happen in a certain degree when you want to work in technology. But once I don't know, I want to work on my own things, and you can kind of do that anywhere, right? So I moved to Atlanta. Seemed like a good call when finally we decided to move, because it's amazing. We spent a lot of time looking at cities, where the schools were, and Atlanta just won out over everything. So
Cool.
I've been thoroughly impressed with Atlanta ever since we moved. And
Awesome.
I want everybody to come here.
Well, we'll come back to Atlanta, and so help us understand. So, classically trained photographer.
No, zero trained photographer. Was it YouTube trained photographer? I don't know. No, I have never had kind of formal training in anything I've ever done. I'm much more the self-teach tutorial website generation of people. YouTube University. I graduated honors, I think. So learning anything has never been easier. As long as you have the time, and I was fortunate enough to have a lot of time. So it's being somewhat part photographer helps me build photography-related products a lot better. So.
Gotcha. So let's dive in a little bit about the photography-related products. So exposure is your bread and butter. Mm-hmm. Thousands of customers, household name products, Atlanta United, Duke basketball. Let's go to what exposure is today, but also the genesis of okay, so you're in the UK, you move to San Francisco, and all of a sudden you build this elegant SaaS product. There's a lot going on here, but just give everyone an idea of what exposure is, what it is today, and then we'll just dive in on some of the pieces there.
Right. Exposure doesn't have any atypical startup story about it, apart from I built it because I needed it. So when I originally moved to San Francisco, I moved to our studio called Elepath. Elepath was founded by one of the founders of Vimeo, Jake Lodwick. And his idea, well, it was always quoted as an experiment. We all signed up for a social experiment, essentially. And he wanted to put a bunch of creative developers in a room, and creative developer meant designer, engineer, writer. It doesn't matter. As long as you make and you're a professional maker, be in this room. Here's a bunch of resources, build tools you want. And eventually there would be a hit. That was the thing. Something will work out. So I joined because I liked shipping stuff on my own, having entrepreneur vibes basically was the right fit for that. And it came about that when I joined, I had to go home for a little bit to get visa stuff sorted out. And during that time, I went to Estonia to meet some original startup friends that I'd made. And that trip is the reason Exposure exists, essentially. Because I just got a new camera at the time, and I just learned how to I'd done my YouTube university, and I'd figured out how to use it a lot better, and figured out Lightroom to a bit, like started screwing with presets. I'm like, cool, I can make these photos look 10 times what they were before. And we went to this old prison in Estonia, and the prison had been open through various different decades and had a bunch of different chairs, designs of chairs. So I took all these nice pictures of chairs, essentially, in this haggard-ass prison. And when I came home, I realized that I didn't have anywhere to put these photos and the story around the prison, because the prison was like ex-Russian. It was crazy. And at the time, I mean, the landscape of photo sharing or storytelling was like, you start a WordPress blog, you start Instagram, you Tumblr or Medium and things like that, like all network-related tools or self-hosted solutions. Hosted solutions. And there was nothing that made me feel like it was going to be easy to tell this story, which kind of is the whole emphasis of exposure. Like, it's supposed to empower you to go from, I have all these visuals in a story, to, here's my story, here's the world, like, enjoy, like, share.
Were there a lot of people that said, well, you can do that in WordPress?
Of course. There's always people that, but there's never been, I've been thinking about this like a whole bunch lately. I'm like, there's opportunity in every tool someone uses because you can build it a better way. Like, there's, like, exposure at its core is just fancy blogging. Like, sure. But if you put the message of, like, visual storytelling on it, it actually becomes there's a different reason to use it.
Totally.
And it was really kind of a light bulb moment when we did the first prototype, because I enjoyed the what you see is what you get editor of the world. Like, Medium had just like popped, and it was like, oh, this is perfect. Like, I don't want any Chrome. I don't want a network around my content. I want the content front and center and everything else to fall away. And I want to be able to publish it fast. So at the time, like, Medium was, for writers, the perfect answer to that, because it was type, done. There was no cognitive dissonance between what you were writing and what it looked like. It was pure, right? So, like, the short, tiny pitch was like, I want Medium for photos. And I was in a studio that was like, you can build that. Okay. So we started, so we essentially, like, whipped up a few prototypes.
And this was 2013?
2013.
Okay.
Did a few prototypes. I used one of my friend's wedding photos as example content and, like, made him cry a little bit. So I was like, I'm onto something. Like, if I'm able to display content in such a way that people are, like, emotionally connected to it through just layout, like, there's a bunch of stuff there. Like, that's pretty hard to do, considering the amount of content you consume all day. Like, very little of it actually connects with you.
Sure.
So yeah, we did prototypes of what we thought was a good idea.
And that was 2013. And so, how did you get your first customer?
Right.
Besides your buddy who.
Oh no, he didn't pay. LPAS model was Sketch Beta Business. Sketch being the horrible, awful prototype that honestly you only show your close friends because you're embarrassed of it. Beta being like, here's a group of people that we think might be ideal users. What do you think? If that works, turn it into a business. Like, that's something I could always really, given San Francisco and the environment, and, like, build apps, grow, like, just do a land grab, essentially. Like, I could always appreciate that, like, building a business is wired into the model. And so that's what we did. Like, once we'd validated it with a bunch of people that were, like, stoked, that were interested, like, we were like, let's just put it into a business, put it out in the world. And this is where Exposure's story kind of deviates, because at this point we weren't hustling. Like, while typically you build a business, and if you don't raise money, you're building with priority, right? You're, like, trying to get these first customers. Like, we weren't in the situation where we had to worry about that, so we built product. Like, that's the only solution we worked on. Mm-hmm. Like, we didn't worry about marketing. We didn't worry about customer success even. Like, we didn't worry about, like, the typical things that are related with growing the business part. 4 years later, very interesting to try and see where we missed that. We should have done there, but essentially just focusing on product for the first, like, year or so, I think the first year brought in like 1,000 customers. Actually, that's probably wrong. 800.
And was that all through just word of mouth? And
well, it's virality built in, right? Like, because people for the most part, like 89% of the use case is I want to publish this content and share it with the world. The rest is like share it with just my family or whatever. But yeah, I mean, our logo was on everything.
Right.
So it's the tool itself, it's not like a revolutionary idea. The framing around it, around visual stories, that resonated with people. And then it started to a point where like, I remember I had a friend who worked at Lyft, and he started using it and then eventually took it to his communications manager and was like, hey, I think this is a good, cool tool for what we're doing. And Lyft has a big story, right? Like there's many different ways for them to empower what they're talking about. And I just remember that at one point he told me like, yeah, they're having a meeting about what to do with their exposure strategy. And I was like, what? Like, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. Like my thing, because I didn't realize at the time that we'd created a avenue for people to tell stories, but like in a very specific fashion, like visually based.
Yep.
So people have been kind of looking for non-traditional blogging. Like there's that surface tension of like, I want to be creative and I want an outlet. I want a canvas essentially. Yep. So like So
the ideal customer is a customer that has professional photographers or photographs that are coming out. That's why, you guys have a lot of clients that are professional sports teams.
Right. I mean,
is that fair to assume? Here's a good example. Atlanta United.
Right. So moving to Atlanta and having the Falcons and United use it is actually really cool. Like, I think I'm really proud of that. So Atlanta United are a great example because they've done Behind the Stripes, which is a series of the original backers, and why they back the team and why they live in Atlanta. And I think they're on like their 50th story right now. And while relatively simple in layout and format, they've been able to publish 50 of these things in a very small amount of time and effort. They actually embed these on their website. So if you go on AtlantaUnited.com or whatever, like there's just an exposure embed, and they leave the logo on, which still blows my mind. Like they have a button to turn the branding off, and there's a huge exposure logo right on their website.
But that's part of the. I mean, if you are a company to use exposure, you are on the
right, yeah,
the cool side of.
But in terms of ideal client, there's like, has everybody watched Seinfeld? Okay, so you know the episode where it's the parody of when they pitch Seinfeld and like the show is about nothing? That's how I feel about exposure sometimes. Because it's not particularly for anything. It's like a canvas and people use it the way they need. Like we give them the reason to use it, but they use it how they wish. So exposure treads right now, which is a problem and an opportunity, is it treads a line between consumer use and business enterprise use.
Yep.
And whereas Atlanta United can use it, and the United Nations Development Program and nonprofits and brands, and Filson used it for a bit. Like we can also have one of my favorite members is someone who's just been traveling the world with his kids for like 3 years, and every country, every continent is on exposure. So it can be useful for like all these different use cases. And that will happen like completely organically.
Right.
We outlined the mission of like visual storytelling, and that really hit people in the head. Even hit people in the head. That's not quite right. Yeah. It hit the right mark because the effort to put content into a platform and get the results out is actually there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah.
And this is what I mean by like.
So was that part of the vision back in 2013 of, hey, we're going to build this platform that makes it really easy and simple to tell beautiful stories? That was the...
Yep. We built it for me because I wanted something to post my travel, like my bougie ass travel photos on. Like, there's no like bigger. I wasn't visionally minded at the time. Like I had the idea that like people would enjoy visually storytelling.
You were just scratching your own itch.
Right. Yeah. And exposure has grown into a mission, right? Like especially being at ATV, like I see people who can see. They have the opportunity to have like foresight and hindsight.
Right.
Like I didn't operate. When we first built it, we weren't operating in any sort of foresight and hindsight. It was just like, I want to build this right now for this problem.
So we've talked about this before, but exposure in the Valley versus exposure in Atlanta, right? So exposure in the Valley, if it's not Instagram, people are just like, I mean, what's the perception of a startup that has thousands of paying customers? There's this viral coefficient to it. It's beautiful, it's elegant, but yet it's not Instagram.
It's scale. So scale has a completely different meaning in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, especially when it comes to photo sharing apps. Like there has been a million, there's been a huge, there's been winners, right? Instagram now runs the world on your phone. Like everybody has pretty much Instagram on their phone, right? And they all spend all day scrolling through it. So there's like tons of opportunity for photo sharing stuff because visual mediums connect much better than everything else. But in terms of how it's perceived as a business, there's people that get it and there's people that aren't there for that. So like we actually raised like a tiny round when we span out of the studio into our own company, and we did do a tiny round, and I gave the same spiels to the handful of investors we have, and they were behind it. So it's more like who you talk to, but the conversations are very different. Like here, I talk a lot more about the business itself and the customers and churn and like all the stuff that actually surrounds the actual product versus the product itself. Mm-hmm. San Francisco, maybe I didn't have the same kind of network. I think obviously Atlanta Tech Village has a lot more business inclined people, but I just remember talking about product all the time. Yeah. And never about churn. Like I don't think I had one conversation about churn. I was like, I'm sure it's fine. So
real quick, let's go back to that, right? So when Kasim Reed spoke a few weeks ago down at Switchyards, he talked about, if someone in Atlanta has merit, you don't have to wait in line, right?
Yep.
And he sat there in front of the entire audience and said, if you're someone and up in New York and you want to go meet Mayor de Blasio, good luck, right? And yet here he is on a casual Thursday night in front of 250 people, 300 people, open arms and willing to have a dialogue. Kind of tangential. So you moved to Atlanta in June.
I've been here like 8 months and I'm sat here with you.
Yeah, that's a bad thing. That's a very bad thing. But you're able to network, and you're not a professional networker, right?
Absolutely not. I'm going to be exhausted after this.
But you have been able to get into the flow of things, right? You've connected with so many great folks in Atlanta. What advice do you have for someone who's moving from it could be Chicago or New York or San Fran to Atlanta and saying, all right, here I'm going to dive headfirst, and what did you do? And I know we met through JC, through your involvement with Community Bucket. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to someone who's moving to Atlanta from another city and wants to get networked in?
Networked in. Can I just say meet you? Because you've done more intros than anybody else. Just say hi. Like people are, San Francisco was always friendly, but it's a very different type of friendly. I don't know quite how to describe how I feel living in Atlanta and being able to, like you said, like just know people. Like I feel like I have a pretty good handle on the creative community, the technology community, and that like it was very easy to invest in it as a person, and that just came from saying hi to a handful of people who knew everybody else. Like everybody kind of knows everybody through various different communities. So whereas Dave from Brick and Mortar in the West Side, like somehow knows Ty, who sits in our office. Like it's just like there's a bunch of interlocking circles. But in the grand scheme of things, like just hang out on Twitter. Like Atlanta's Twitter for technology community folks definitely rules.
It's so funny because the Atlanta's Twitter is fascinating because there's like no one wants to drive anywhere, and there's like 8 cities within the Metro Atlanta area, but everyone can be like, all right, I'm just going to get on Twitter and tweet a little bit, and someone downtown will pick it up, or someone in Alpharetta will pick it up, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, yeah. I've just connected with like 5 people within 30 seconds.
The weirdest technology story I had was. So when we first moved, we stayed in a house on Carroll Street, and we were looking at apartments, and one of them was the mattress factory lofts. So I was going through so Instagram Stories just launched that tag thing. So I was like looking at stories, and there was this like really cool, like, oh, this guy knows how to shoot his apartment. And I was like, that looks great. Like, I'm going to go check out this guy. Brinson McGowan. I don't know if anybody knows that guy. But so like I just looked at his Instagram photos, and then I was like, hey, how's living in that building? He's like, oh, it's cool. You want to hang out? I was like, wait, what? Like, that's not what I was asking, but sure. And so that actually led to like a whole world of photography community. He worked at Huge. Thankfully, he bailed and moved to Chicago like a dummy. But like just opportunities like that like are really fun because like just hanging out on the just various location tags on Instagram and being content creation inclined, like there was an easy connection there, and Atlanta has some of the most talented people I know, and was able to get Chris to shoot this event, which is cool. It's like I said, it's everybody. There's a friendliness threshold there that is so much higher than I've ever experienced before. And just people want to kick it and talk shop, and you don't have to feel bad about it.
Yeah. And so can we give the credit move to your significant other?
Yes. You can give a lot of credit to her. Most really. She's right there if you want to tell her she's great.
Nice. Wonderful. That's great. And so let's go back to exposure. Mm-hmm. And I whenever we talk to entrepreneurs, I always am like, this isn't the field of dreams most of the time, right? If you build it, they will come. But that's actually the exact opposite for you. Yeah. So what did you do to build the field of dreams? Because that's every entrepreneur's dream, right? Hey, I'll just focus on the product for a year, put it out there, and then people will just come to it and start using it, and it'll grow organically, and voila, I'm good.
Yeah, I feel kind of silly that happened. I mean, try 4 years on product instead of 1. Like, I've spent, again, like being in this community, especially, and having you guys to talk to all the time, it's a lot of hindsight has come into the fact that essentially I took a real pain in the ass and problem that people had and just worked on the product solution for that. It was more about like making someone's day versus trying to think about building a business, because people will pay for better experiences, yep. Right? Like, and that's what I mean. Exposure it's just a CMS. Like in the bare bones, like it's a Rails app on a CMS. But if you are delivering the experience, people try to avoid because other tools suck for it, or they just don't give them the right thing they want to produce. Like there's a lot of value to create. There's your field of dreams to create there. There's 5,000 customers who won't even care what you're saying to them marketing-wise and be like, this is the output I wanted. Right. Minimum input, like most enjoyable input in, maximum output. And if you make user-generated content sites that actually make the user, sorry, we call them members. I actually hate saying the word user in a little bit. But making them look great is like the best feeling.
Yep.
Like, because if you basically make them look like they're doing a great job, regardless if it's for personal use or the business use, then you've got something there. Like there's a lot of brand equity to build just from making someone feel like they are doing a good job and that it was easy.
Yep. So you moved into the CEO role probably three or 4 months ago, maybe a little bit longer?
October, like on paper, essentially. Okay. Like it was.
Talk to me about some of the skill development growth required to move from product, 100% product to, okay, now I'm looking at the P&L, and now I'm looking at churn, and because that's a part of the story that I want to make sure gets told of. You were in a great spot to focus just on the product,
yep.
Right? But now, as things evolved with the business, there's movement in the executive team, mm-hmm. and you've now taken ownership of everything. What are some of the leaps of getting to the next level to run the business that you've had to take?
Right. For some context, I had there's 2 of us. I had a co-founder leave in October, and he was the business end essentially. I think so. We built a board of directors immediately. They basically act as my advisor therapist at this point. I'm not going to pretend like I know how to look after a business, or I didn't. And there's a lot of insight that you have to invest in to understand the pulse of the business, especially like a SaaS business, right? Because where we kind of we didn't ignore what the revenue was doing, but it was always going up, so whatever. We had the cash on hand to focus on the product. Like I said, it's always in hindsight, all we did was product, all we did. But now, I'm able to actually see where strong markets are and who's using it, how they're using it, who spends the most money, who stays the longest, things like that. It's just insight. So,
and how did you pick your board, right? Because a lot of entrepreneurs are trying to put whether it's advisors around or a board together. How did you develop the trust, and how did you understand, okay, these are people that I want to get into my professional marriage with?
One of our advisors actually became a board member. So Michael Gruen, who was a lifelong friend, super startup guy, started a bunch of stuff, sold a bunch of stuff, now works at WorkMarket as a chief data scientist, knows analytically what startups should be doing, and he was always super valuable, if not give me a hard fucking time about it. Mm-hmm. He would be really quite stern, but I needed that. That's the kind of person that I do need to flourish, I guess. And then our most recent board member, Heidi, we just put an ad on AngelList. That was we outlined exactly the kind of person we needed, which was someone who's not product focused, C-level marketing kind of person, has been in the game a very long time, and she's been at it for 20 years, seen seismic shifts in the digital world and things like that.
And all to focus on more insight into growing the business.
Right. What decisions should we make now to take this product that works and sells and sell it? Stop building, start selling is basically the goal. This quarter, fix things that are, that we didn't focus on, like customer success and churn and marketing, because the product is working. The product is going to be okay. Mm-hmm. That was always the anxiety. If we don't keep making the product better, people will leave. I'm no, the product's in a great shape and always has been. It's in a better shape, obviously, because we're...
So then what are the next steps now to focus on the customer success and sales and marketing? I mean, are you putting the right people in place? Are you hiring? Or are you... from the insight that you've gotten and the decisions you've made, what are the actions that you're all right, this is priority number one?
Priority number one is install the infrastructure to actually do customer success and marketing correctly. Intercom. Everybody sees the intercom bubble, but intercom is the most bananas powerful way to segment and communicate with people in app. In-app messaging is so, for at least for our customers, is it resonates so better than email. People won't read an email. They love to click a tiny chat bubble with faces in it. It sounds simple, but people love it. So make sure all that is in place so we can articulately target the right customer or the right user who we now have numbers on who will stay, or they're in risk of leaving, or they could potentially do with an upgrade, et cetera. So there's a lot of like I said, infrastructure tweaks, which it's a 4-year-old product. There's technical debt to work through. That's fine. It needs it. Other stuff is refocusing on the mission and vision that can inspire a 5-year plan versus a at the end of the week plan.
Yep.
Because when you focus on product, you're essentially thinking about things that will, impact people right now. I can ship a feature and they will impact right now. But if you are going to grow a business for the next 5 years, 10 years, there's a much bigger play. There's a long tail way to talk about your product and inspire people, right? Because you can get people on board for the next 5 years if you give them the right message.
So is this a business that in 3 years you sell, or is this a business 20 years from now that you will be, putting blood, sweat, and tears?
I mean, it's been my life for 4 years. I think Atlanta is the environment to build exposure into a real business and have a whole team of hopefully Atlanta people working on it. I mean, it's the most fun. I'm in that stage where like, even if I was to stop doing the product, like the stuff I love, and move into more of like the actual leadership of a team or something like that, like I actually am stoked on that versus like the typical worry I think that comes from builders and makers. They're like, at some point I'm going to stop doing fun stuff. I'm like, nah, this is going to be fun all the way through. Like, this is going to be great. But no, I am, no, exposure rules.
Yeah. So, you former co-founder left, and due to that, you've also been still getting kind of having a job from the West Coast, and which is a hell of a job, right? So, explain a little bit about that, and then I want to dive into, can you build a startup and have a job at the same time, but I don't want to get ahead, right?
Yeah, sure.
So right now you are gainfully employed.
Right. I'm actually creative director for Voyage, which is a self-driving taxi company in California, which sounds as Silicon Valley as it can get, and it is. It's fascinating. It's an amazing opportunity to work on. Right now, I'm doing a pretty good job at both. Like, I'm not too crazy. I think I'm crazy, period. But it's you can, if you care about technology, you will notice opportunities for technology that will impact. When people say change the world, there was like a recent like signal versus noise. Did you read that blog? Like, there was a recent article about like when people keep talking about we're going to change the world. I'm like, no, you're not. Like, you're going to change someone's world, not the world. But there's like transportation and robotics like will change the world. Yeah. So there was an opportunity to work on that and also work on exposure. So having an entrepreneurial spirit per se is actually a really good skill to leverage on early stage startups. Yep. Like, when you're the only designer, you know how to design the whole suite of everything you need. So like I'm really useful for stuff like this.
So to all the makers and the creative folks that are building right now and are if their craft is photography or if their craft is writing, I want to dive into that entrepreneurial spirit, because it's not like all of a sudden they just wake up the next day and they're like, I'm going to go start a business, right? What was it? Was the catalyst for you the maker space in San Francisco, where you're like, I want to start this business from, knowing that you're focused on your craft? Like, what was that entrepreneurial spirit? Like, how much fire did it need to actually say, all right, let's go put this operating agreement together?
No.
Yeah.
I think it's, I used to sell typography prints of like Parks and Recs quotes. You probably may have one. I had this poster that said, don't be a dick, just be nice instead, and that sold like thousands of posters. And before that, like, I was doing like band artwork and stuff like that. So like, I always knew that you could make money from being creative. But in the business sense, it was more like once I invested enough time to understand that people make stuff. Like, there's for everything you care about, there's 1,000, 2,000 people making it. And the more you learn how they're making it, the better the lens you have about making an opportunity there. Like, I knew how to build a website, and I was like, building websites suck. Like, I wish there was a tool where I could pay for it and make it easier. Like, of course. But it's all about, I think you need to pick a thing, right? Like, building for a reason is 100% better than building for an opportunity, in my opinion. It's more about what you want as the outcome versus like what you want as your income. I mean, not everybody has that opportunity. Like, I built in a very privileged situation. There's no doubt about that. Like, I know not everybody has the same opportunities that I have had, but at the same time, I can equate that to I'm going to be risky as fuck for like a long time and see what happens.
Right.
So if you're in this situation where you can invest time into learning about what you think the world needs, like, do it, learn how to do it, and build products for reasons. Like, the entrepreneurial stuff came because people wanted to pay for the thing that I wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's pretty, that's damn good. So, you're switching
Sure.
context. You're when you moved to Atlanta, you fell in love with the MARTA logo.
I do love the MARTA logo.
Can you tell us a little bit about just the MARTA logo, why you love it, and I mean, there's not. I love such a fresh perspective from someone who comes, moves to Atlanta, and all I hear about MARTA is just people complaining about it. It's always late. It doesn't go anywhere, and then all of a sudden you come in town, you're like, this logo is amazing. Like, holy crap! Like this whole infrastructure is great. And I'm like, all right, I dig this guy.
Typically, I have not been a fan of public transportation. I have, when I first moved to San Francisco, I bought a bike immediately and never took a bus to figure out how to get around. Atlanta, not quite there bike-wise. Still kind of dicey. The potholes the size of your bike are cool. Especially when I moved up here, it was like, I'll just get the train. I was like, okay. But the everything looks so damn 80s and 90s, and there's that whole nostalgia period for my generation right now, which feels weirdly home. It does remind me of British transportation logos a little bit. The palette is great. As an actual brand, it sits in this accidentally nostalgic cool realm, which I love so much. If anybody can get me a MARTA t-shirt, please get me a MARTA t-shirt. And I don't have any feelings associated with it, right? I moved to Atlanta really not knowing anything about MARTA particularly because I was like, I'm going to buy a bike and figure it out. No. So I had the lens of I've not lived here. I don't have the negative connotations to it. And honestly, I've never been on a late MARTA train, so I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. But
that's great. That's great to hear.
And now I actually live here, and I've committed to learning about the city and living here, and we just bought our first house, so I want to make sure that I understand what's going on in the city essentially. But I can see why MARTA has a ways to go, but not with the logo. Please never change that, and don't change it to ATL.
They want to change it to the ATL.
No, don't do that. Don't ever do that. Like I said, there's a magnitude of problems. Their logo is not one of them. Yeah. And yeah, there's a squintiness about it that you can squint at it and still see it, and I love that about a brand. And it doesn't even have a mark, man. The black buses with the stripes on. I don't think I've ever seen a more beautiful bus in my whole life. I stopped to look at it. I'm like, this is great. I'm sure not everybody feels the same way I feel about MARTA, but yeah, it's cool. There's going to be a made in Atlanta, built in Atlanta logo on the bottom of the exposure site, which is a parody of the logo. So
that is very cool.
I think about making pins. If anybody maybe wants a pin.
Yeah, I'll take a pin.
Okay.
Speaking of that, we do have some shirts.
Sure. Yeah, that little gray box back there.
Are those the storyteller?
No, this is the limited release spring-summer collection. There's a bunch of shirts there. If you run out of your size, just let me know. There's a bunch more. But feel free to take a shirt and a sticker if you want.
Awesome. Well, I know we're coming up on our time, but as kind of closing out, so Exposure's in a spot right now where there's this adoption, membership continues to grow, but yet there's this big daunting future of, oh my gosh, we're now getting outside of the product, and we now are focusing on customer success and how to communicate to customers and upsell. And so what's ahead in terms of bringing people on, in terms of how the community can help Exposure get to the vision that you have, which is, it's your blood, sweat, and tears for the last 4 years. You want this company to be around 20 years from now. Let's talk about the next 6 months and just kind of your plan of attack and how the community can be helpful from whether it's interns or
Sure. So as a huge pain point, the main reason people cancel their account is because they don't post enough, and they can't warrant keep paying for a service that they aren't using. that is a direct correlation for us not investing enough in the community efforts in the product and the outreach from us as a brand. Like, Exposure has like a ton of brand equity to spend. Like, we haven't screwed up. Like, we don't do any terms and conditions, like scariness. Like, we're in a good spot. People trust us. And there's no particular outbound voice for that. So one thing I do want to do in the next 3 months is install a community manager, and which will basically empower people to contribute stories. Because if you have a reason to post, you're much likely to post. Mm-hmm. You're not going to pay for a tool that you aren't using, and I completely agree with that. But if you find the community valuable, you find paying for it valuable.
Yep.
So there's like a lot to do there, and that means actual events or posting subjects. Like we used to do one which is like your year in review. Like we haven't done that for years because we just didn't. Like there's a whole world of opportunity just right there. Yep. This is the side of the coin, which is individuals. Not just brands. Like you're essentially creating pools of people that care about specific topics that have stories to tell, and you're like, oh, by the way, you can do that right here with us. So there's a lot to do there. And yeah, I mean, if anybody super loves social media and community management, then come say hi. The other side of that is focusing on possibly 1 or 2 lighthouse customers, and what I mean by that is a enterprise account that is like, it's much bigger than a team, it's much bigger than a brand, it's a organization like the MLS. Like, so 75% of MLS teams use Exposure every week, and we've only talked to the league like once. So there's tons of opportunity there to like say hi and possibly help them do some sort of innovation around storytelling, because brands need that right now, considering the temporary the half-life of content. So working on that. Again, found Tyler. I don't know where he is. Oh, he's right there. He's actually going to help understand that landscape. Like I said, like Exposure has been a product about a product for a long time. So now we have to take a step back, see what has organically built itself around the product, and nourish all those areas. Yeah. Like no more letting a corner of it die that saw some interest. Like this is where we have to water the right areas, and yeah, just like make sure the product is in a continuously better shape to have more revenue to execute on bigger ideas.
Sure. Let's give it up for Luke.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions?
I checked out your pricing, and I'm also B2C. I was wondering if there was like a story on how you kind of arrived at your pricing, or
no.
No. Okay.
There is.
Has that been your pricing the whole time? 5, 9, and 59?
We used to just have 9. We originally launched with just 9 and 99, 9 per month or 99 per year. Once brands started coming on, like it was a reaction that we built the business plan. Named it poorly, I think. Business isn't the right word. And that was arbitrarily like 59 or 499 a year. Like we weren't. It's kind of harks back to like the non-traditional point of view. Like we weren't. There was no foresight to the pricing decisions. $5 a month came when people started churning for too expensive. Like we have a downgrade feedback, and there's a bunch of check marks you can check, and too expensive was one of them. And so it was like, don't post enough, too expensive. So we're like, well, let's see if people care enough to have $5 a month and you don't get any of the features, but you can post as much as you want. And that went well. Like that was a Band-Aid. Nowadays, like I'm less inclined because like there's such like after Stripe fees, it's like $4.70 or something like that, and they tend to churn pretty fast overall. So it's something that now we have the opportunity to see, like, okay, well this has been working. Let's actually try some pricing experiments and fix the infrastructure under it to make sure we can do pricing experiments. But yeah, like price change is actually coming end of the month, something like that.
And then I'll hand over the mic, but I got one more question. Sure. You talked about the angel list for a board member. Do you have any advice for like compensation of board members?
If they care enough, like some equity plus $100 an hour. Like that's all we offered. There was no actual money. Like most of the people who are going to hang out on AngelList and look for a board position are either in a position in their own position of life where they can help. They want to contribute, right? They're not. They can maybe see a cash out down the line or something, an upsell for them. But most people, like, it's their whole life. They want to help you. That's how Heidi came through. Like, she was like, "Look, you guys suck at like all this stuff, and this is my like jam for the past like 30 years. Like, stop. Like, talk to me." And like we got an amazing amount of traction from that. I think we had like 30 applicants or something like that. I mean, probably like 50% of those like legitimate candidates, but I was like seriously surprised. And that came from Gruen, our other board member, was like, just throw it on AngelList, man. Like, it's free. Like, see what happens. And there are people that have built businesses, sold businesses, been part of ginormous corporations that all just want to help. Like, they get the good vibes.
So you've obviously gone through this just complete and total transformation from when you first started building the product until now, and stepping into more of like the entrepreneurial and like business role. What were the biggest lessons that you've learned from the product perspective?
Put labels on stuff. Like, don't try to design for the person who just looks at an icon. There's a bunch of, from a product side, it's just like clarity about what's about to happen. I mean, it's kind of more of an experience side, but being able to deliver on something when you press a button, like, I think that's kind of like a value I hold to the product at least. But undoable things, like people are scared to use your product for the first time. Like, that's how I think about almost everything. What happens when I press this delete button? Like, what does my account do? Like, there's the product should always be in a position that it's your friend, it's not trying to sell you something. Like, we build product to empower you immediately, not after you buy it. And that was, I think we've always like leaned into that really hard, like a really long trial. The trial was like 2 weeks. And it's, I love seeing people publish stuff. Like we'd always like, if we see an exceptional story, like we will say it and we will tell you. But in terms of really nitty gritty product stuff, like design for clarity and build for dependability. Like, don't go down. Like, it's really easy not to do that these days. It's never been cheaper to build a rock solid product. It's harder to grow it, sure, but like infrastructure shouldn't be an issue.
I'm reading a book by some of the people from Ruby on Rails.
Cool.
And it's on startup and usability. And what they said was that they actually chose their first segment with which to approach with Ruby on Rails based on sort of the virality of where they knew that community would move them forward most rapidly. And they chose design. And you're talking very powerfully about image and sort of weaving it into story. Now, the other part you said earlier is that you're self-educated through YouTube University, right? There's a lot of technical, deep information that's complicated, and visual is becoming more and more important in supporting and moving that. And you say helping first-time users get over their resistance, fear. I guess where I'm going with this is there have you seen ways or applications that lend themselves to weaving what you're doing with more of a reading world? You've got words woven in, but there are things that are technical to be communicated and taught, and sort of how you've thought that through from your own experience, or what you've seen best practices with others. What are good examples and ways of moving, like weaving Tableau into what you're doing, or text? Because what I'm learning is a new generation of students isn't really motivated. Like you're saying, it should be enthusiastic from the start. They're not motivated by textbooks. That's really where this question's going.
Are we talking from an education context here?
Yeah, like sort of what they call just-in-time information, or being a skeptical reader.
Oh, okay.
Both of those.
Right. Wow, that's a really tough question. Communications is key, right? Like it's setting expectations with the promise of whatever you're trying to do, and I can really appreciate. So Abigail, who's my wife, was a product marketing manager and did a lot of technical documentation for a product that is quite technical. And there's a lot to be said about investing in communications early on and being able to have the right answer at the right time. So, like I said, like Intercom or all these tooling, all these amazing tooling that you have at your disposal now when you want to build a business, gives you the option to be like, I see something is happening. Here is the exact information you need to accomplish this task. And I mean, it's something that shouldn't be skipped, but a lot of people do. Like, if you're gonna be like, I feel like this should be doing better, spend a day on the communications part. Like, it's just about what is being said to the person about to use your product. So.
Did you think Intercom is
Intercom's like a whole suite of stuff these days, but they have a really great way of in-app messaging, but also like a way to suggest a help article. So they have a whole help center product inside a communications product. So if someone is in your app and they click a link like 4 times in a row, you can be like, looks like you're trying to do this, dude. Like, here's exactly how to do it.
Okay, sort of inferring what the user's about.
Yep.
At the moment.
Yep. So contextual and timely help, is gold. Like, we don't do enough of it, and this is what, again, like I said, I'm focusing on. There's a whole opportunity. There's a whole landscape of opportunity just by paying attention to what people are doing, when they're doing it, and how you can help them. It's one of those really weird answers. There's like common sense, but nobody. When you're so deep in building business and products, you forget that people aren't using your product every day like you are. Like, I use Exposure every day. I definitely do not need to use Exposure every day. I need to watch other people do it every day. Yeah, exactly. And JC, who's over there, who's amazing, Atlanta Ventures put together an exposure site for these events, and I watched JC use it, and I literally fixed things on the fly because I was like, why is that doing that? But there's opportunities to automate that also, so you can feel like your product is talking straight back to you, as opposed to having me stood behind you and be like, that is very broken. I'm going to fix that right now.
Even though it ramifies very quickly, people keep coming to choices, decisions.
With automation? Yeah. No. I think spending that hour on communications and figuring out what needs to be said where will save you a million years in time just down the line. Like, the end of the week will save you time if you just put the time in Monday to make sure you're doing the right messaging at the right point. I can tell, technical stuff can get really dry, and products can get really intimidating to use. But if you just make the worst part of their day great, well, not worst part of their day. I mean, I don't know what they're using. It's a terrible way to put it. But if you make a dry part of the day kind of delightful or at least informative, you're good. Sorry.
So early you talked about being enamored with shipping yourself.
Yep.
But then later you said you had a co-founder that just left. So over the years, when have you decided to pull people in to help you build the product? Has it just always been you? How have you made decisions on key points to bring in help?
Right.
Or not?
I mean, this is a lot. There's a lot happening with that right now because I'm basically having to take on a lot more engineering. But it's to the point where if I don't feel comfortable deploying something, someone else should be doing it. There's, especially with a paid product like this, take down your free social site. I don't give a crap. But a customer who pays for it, that is they give all the craps. Do not ruin their website because you shipped a bad button. So there's a lot. I've grown as as a engineer, like as a developer, so I'm much more self-aware of what matters for that stuff. But there's just some things that professionals should do. Like it's the generalist versus specialist argument, right? And when it comes to the technologies behind exposure, there are specialists that are definitely needed for specific points. A lot of it is just like vanilla Rails, like making a good settings page. Like most websites are just settings pages, like so you can make that really nice and not have to have a specialist for it. But if you feel uncomfortable and you feel like it's going to be a part of your business that sells it, put a specialist on it if you need it.
Are you happy you didn't build an engineering team and you kept it all running for you?
It's kept it cheap. I mean, I can save a lot of money. At some point, I want someone to rebuild the whole thing. But right now, we're in that, as Hubert said at the SaaS Forum, like we're in that beautiful stage where it's like, get it out, make sure it works, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Exposure is going to be perfect one day. Not right now, but that's okay. But yeah, there's going to be there's going to be an engineering champion of exposure one day. Right now, it's me.
Here.
Oh yeah, right.
Well, I've got 3 questions. Okay, so one, I really do. Do you guys have any API integrations or anything like that you guys are enabling developers to build on top of your system? And what are those?
Privately is a read API. So you can take all your content and do whatever you want with it, but you'll lose our context. Like the way we lay it out won't come with it. We've seen a couple people, like brands, who are like, I really want to just list the stories on our website in like a menu. And we're like, here's your endpoint, like go nuts. It's not something I have the time or resources for to make a good effort for. Like I think the API needs to be loved, to be loved. And we're not in that situation yet. Like I'm be like, here's our PDF with like our really rough docs. Like, what do you think? Like, it's kind of that. But there's a whole opportunity. There's a whole opportunity for exposure content to move throughout the world and be in the context it needs to be via an API.
Yeah, I didn't know if like you guys had any future plans for like a contentful like CMS as a service or something like that, right?
Yep. I mean, exposure lives as one point in a workflow that is ideation to distribution. Like everything along there, I want to build products for all of it.
And it sounds like you're also like basically Squarespace for photo stories, right? So
yep.
One of the things I found that with these Squarespace Wix style sites is that they don't help with discoverability for the actual sites themselves, right? And I was wondering if there was an opportunity there for you guys to build something that helped a little bit better with discoverability that says this is like I guess kind of like what's the site that people build like sell crafts and stuff on?
Etsy.
Etsy. Etsy creates a marketplace for people to be able to see these things. But there's some level of customizability with your images and stuff like that. And then I guess the last question, so you can just roll it on. One is like, do you guys ever think about expanding to like e-commerce or something like that, being able to sell rights to, I know Pexels just raised like a big round and stuff for doing these kind of things like open Creative Commons images and stuff like that.
Have you read my notes?
No.
This is a very articulate question.
No.
Distribution, discoverability, absolutely yes. It's wrapped into the community problem where people don't post enough. You create enough ways for people to find your story, people will find it. So Visit Copenhagen, the travel tourism industry, actually, I had a really great chat with one of their guys, and he's like, we use Exposure because it's the pond where the fish are, because Exposure feels like a travel website to those who just check out what we've curated, because it's a lot of good travel. So there's lots of opportunities to create distribution and those ponds for specific communities. Cycling, like Exposure kills in cycling. I don't like spandex cycling, not like. So there's efforts to fix search. There's effort to fix editorial, and there's efforts to fix community categories, like being able to invest in, being able to contribute to a topic. And you're exactly right. Like, people do really love that. And when you can, the word exposure is actually a reference to photography exposure, but the amount of people that churn out and be like, low views. I'm like, I know, like, I'm sorry. Like, because it's called exposure. So yeah, no, totally feel that. Like, we already do a good job of curation, but no one sees it because it's not front and center. When you sign up, if we know you're a person who's interested, we should be sending you this stuff. And like I said, part of the infrastructure fix is to make sure we can target and move features around depending on who you are. E-commerce wise, yes, we have a hard-coded test for Shopify integration for Wear Civic, who's this T-shirt, if you like this T-shirt, to be able to basically like link up with Shopify and be like, shop this story, because there's a lot of value. If we can get that right, like that's crazy. Like, because if we were to create a marketplace for content that you can also buy the products of the brands you enjoy, there's a whole world there. It's like the whole content is king, right? Like the Bill Gates, right? Like so many years ago.
Somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. Bill Gates, like the internet's a marketplace of content. Like this is like Exposure sits as a marketplace of content, just without the legs to pull it off yet.
Let's give him a round of applause.